A warm welcome to the program. Thank you for joining us. Now, is Sudan about to be taken off from the U.S. list of states sponsoring terrorism? The Northeast African country's Foreign Affairs Minister, El-Dardiri Mohamed Ahmed, in an interview recently, expressed optimism on this, saying the process will start soon. According to the top diplomat, his meetings with U.S. officials were effective in convincing Washington that Sudan has taken measures against terrorism and that it is time to begin the process of removing the country from the U.S. State Department's list of states sponsoring terrorism.
The diplomatic relationship between the United States and Sudan has already experienced its share of tensions in the past since Khartoum was designated as a government sponsoring terrorism in 1993 under the Clinton administration. The country has also been hit by Washington sanctions for alleged Sudanese support for multiple terrorist groups, including Al-Qaeda, Hamas and Hezbollah. A designation that was motivated by political reasons at the time estimated that the Sudan Minister for Foreign Affairs was El-Dardiri.
Lopez is a development economist and a former executive secretary of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. He joins us now from Cape Town, South Africa. Good morning, Carlos. Thank you for joining us. First off, do you think Sudan has taken appropriate measures against terrorism and that it is time to begin the process of removing the country from the U.S. terror list?
Well, I think the time where Sudan was very much known for being a training ground for Algerians, Tunisians, and later also Palestinians, Syrians, and Jordanians that were involved with different Islamist terrorist groups is far removed from today's Sudan. This was in the 90s with the very iconic intervention of Osama bin Laden. Since then, Sudan has paid a very hefty price for its involvement and has certainly learned and distanced itself from that type of activity. What Sudan is still known is for various problems with neighbors and also its internal domestic issues of rebellions and the way it has handled diversity. But that is not something that I would consider as terrorist.
You mean, therefore, that Sudan can no longer be really linked to terrorism. But let us talk about human rights. Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International have documented abuses and atrocities carried out by Sudan's security forces. Do you think the country has improved its human rights records?
Well, Human Rights Watch does its work very well. I think it is known that the context of that region is not one that is very favorable to human rights respect by armed forces and armed groups. And certainly, Sudanese interventions have been known for being sometimes quite brutal and not very respectful of diversity. But again, I think this is an area where there has been a, not necessarily exaggeration, but singling out of Sudan as if it was the only country that deserves some sort of special treatment. And I think that is not fair. If you look into casualties resulting from conflict in general and violations of human rights reported by different organizations, there are countries in much worse situation than Sudan, and yet they are not under sanctions.
The question that can also be asked is what can Sudan really expect from this removal from the list of countries supporting terrorism?
I think it has tremendous implications for economic development in Sudan. Right now, banking operations, financial operations with Sudan are basically impossible to do, given the various sanctions that are imposed, not just by the United Nations, but an array of actors, including, of course, the United States that has evolved since, and European Union and others. And I think the moment you remove the sanctions, the first immediate benefit for Sudan is that it will be able to transaction internationally like a normal country, which is not the case right now. And that, in turn, reduces risk quite significantly, because right now you need to have a very big appetite for whatever impossible situation you are going to find in Sudan and still want to invest. And I think this is the main gain that Sudan can get from the sanctions.
Carlos, how long do you think this whole process could take?
Well, normally they could take a long time, but given developments in the area, I think it can be quite fast. There are dramatic developments between Eritrea and Ethiopia. There are also quite a number of dynamic developments taking place between Egypt and its neighbors. There is the war in Yemen. There is certainly, a complete change of situation in Somalia. So there is a lot happening in the neighborhood. And I think Sudan is very much the center of all these different tectonic plates that are changing. And what we have learned in the last 12 months is that things can change quite dramatically and quite speedily. So I wouldn't be surprised once a decision is taken that the tables turn very quickly.
Mr. Lopez, I'd like to thank you very much for speaking with us and sharing with us some insights there on the subject. Carlos Lopez, development economist and former executive secretary of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, speaking to us there from Cape Town, South Africa.